It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. Most of you know that. Those of you that check us out on the DK Network or youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL can see the helmets, the game balls. No, I did not buy those. I earned those with the blood, sweat, and tears. Love those of you that check me out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. Doubleheader this weekend. Sunday, I'll be in Vegas, baby. Vegas, the Browns at the Raiders for CBS. The Raiders typically have very good press box food. And I'll take the red eye from Vegas to Miami Sunday night. Bienvenido, ami. It's so crazy how certain lines from songs are in your head. Anyway, Titans-Dolphins Monday night on the radio for Westwood One. Somebody's got to win that game. That'll be an interesting one. So I want to get some wisdom on both those games and the rest of them as well from my new Fantasy Feast co-host. He's a star. Gotten some good feedback from you guys with YouTube comments, emails, social media about having John Daigle as my co-host. Check him out on social media like I do, by the way, and I don't follow very many people, at NotJDaigle. He is one of the owners over at EstablishTheRun.com, which is one of, if not the most popular fantasy football and betting and props and all that information site. Make sure you use the code FEAST when you go over there so you get the discount. EstablishTheRun.com. You guys know Adam Levitan, Evan Silva, longtime co-host. They're over there. And John, we got to start with the Giants and the Cowboys on Thursday night. Malik Neighbors is real, John, and he's spectacular.
And if anyone did not watch that game, they missed that Malik Neighbors should have had a third touchdown, but Daniel Jones happened to miss him. Jones, who also missed Theo Johnson wide open in the end zone too, before Malik Neighbors caught his first touchdown. But it's true, we were updating the Establish the Run rest of season top 150 just last night, and Malik Neighbors we had to jam up there as the wide receiver 8 overall rest of season, despite our rankings at ETR allowing you to get him in the 3rd round this year. Very high on him moving forward. He should have no issues as a wide receiver 1 in this game. I think the sneakier plays, though, for the Giants is at running back in particular, because the cat's out the bag. Everyone now is aware you can push around the Cowboys front 7 at will. Jerome Ford, 44 yards and a touchdown in week 1. Alvin Kamara, everyone remembers him having 4 touchdowns. And Derrick Henry last week. Lamar Jackson only had 15 pass attempts because the Ravens knew what they could do. And Henry went for 150 and 2 touchdowns. Quietly, only Jordan Mason has forced more missed tackles this year than Devin Singletary at running back for the Giants. So Singletary is someone who is going to pop most likely as closer to a top 12 running back this week, as opposed to the top 24 he's universally ranked as. On the other side of the ball for the Cowboys, that's where it also gets interesting because their offense is falling apart, but Dak Prescott is still putting up elite numbers with CeeDee Lamb. We're still looking, though, for that second receiver behind Lamb. And it was Jake Ferguson last week, double-digit targets, nearly 100 yards receiving. But Jalen Tolbert is the sleeper here that's quietly been popping. Whereas Brandon Cooks has only seen 8.5% of the team's targets the last 2 weeks, Jalen Tolbert now has scored a touchdown in back-to-back games. So I think we're looking at negative game script here, or at least a competitive one, for the Cowboys to continue churning through the air. It's Dak, CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and quietly Jalen Tolbert who seem to be the most successful in this game.
Absolutely love your information, John. I took notes on Devin Singletary, on Malik Neighbors. If I'm ever looking down, that's what I'm doing. Not only just for myself, but also for the social media clips later at Ross Tucker Pod. Let's talk about the Saints and the Falcons. Boy, that Saints offense came to a screeching halt against Philly.
And it's probably because Jordan Davis had one of the best games of his career. The Eagles, at least for one game, figured it out that you crush the pocket from the interior, and that really slows down the entire game plan of the Saints, especially trying to run play action right behind the center. But more concerning is that it does seem like another game where we're not going to get much points because a lot like last year and how Raheem Morris threw a bunch of no-names, a bunch of rookies and undrafted free agents behind Aaron Donald together to create an above-average defense. The Falcons have immense talent, don't get me wrong, but he's doing the same in Atlanta right now. Go back to week 2 when Jalen Hurts only was afforded 6.1 yards per attempt. Patrick Mahomes, just 5.5 yards per attempt on Sunday night. Morris is doing it again with this Falcons defense. And that's really concerning for Derek Carr, especially if Philly did allude to the rest of the league at how to at least limit Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Shaheed was a 0 in the box score, I understand, but we still have him as a top 36 wide receiver the rest of the way. There were some missed opportunities out there, including Kenyon Mitchell breaking up a near touchdown to Shaheed deep as well. So we're just going right back to those two players and Alvin Kamara, who, even in that blowout, 26 carries, my word. They're just not giving the ball to anyone else. So it's pretty easy to project Kamara as a top 24 running back the rest of the season as long as he holds up, especially if they're not going to give any amount of work to relieve him to Jamal Williams. On the other side of the ball, we've also seen some breakout plays the past couple of weeks from the Falcons. Remember, we were all worried about Kirk Cousins' their offense in week 1 against that ferocious and nightmare Steelers front 7. But since then, Zach Robinson, their offensive coordinator, has implemented a lot more play action on 25% of Kirk Cousins' dropbacks, which he's been amazing for his entire career. And we've really seen that help not only Drake London, but quietly Darnell Mooney emerge behind London. Mooney, the last 2 games, only 1 fewer target than London, and he's been targeted on 35% of his routes, a team-high mark from play action in particular. That's where Kirk Cousins seems to love to go whenever he's afforded a little bit more amount of time to get the ball downfield. So Mooney is someone who should be picked up on waiver wires and started as a wide receiver 3 or 4 until further notice.
Bengals, Panthers, both of those offenses came alive in week 3, John.
We can set our watches to the Bengals, Panthers, and Commanders defenses getting everyone there in fantasy. That's how poor they're playing. And that's great because these games need points. So if you want points, I suggest you watch this Bengals-Panthers matchup. And let's start with the Bengals side of the ball because Joe Burrow did look back to a normal self last week, even throwing 2 touchdowns under pressure. And this Panthers defense is giving it up to everyone in the secondary. We recall Shaheed going for 73 yards, that bomb touchdown in week 1. Quentin Johnson got there with 2 touchdown receptions in week 2. And Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker combined last week for 14 catches and 2 touchdowns against this Carolina secondary. Now it's Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Andre Yoshivas's turn, who all you're starting just given the matchup. And you're doing so because on the other side of the ball, Andy Dalton finally instilled life into this Panthers passing attack. He was only pressured on 5 dropbacks all afternoon against that Raiders defense, and we'll get there soon. But it's also how Coach Dave Canales intelligently schemed the offense for him. No quarterback got rid of the ball quicker from snap to throw than Andy Dalton in week 3. And he went 13 of 16 within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage just because he would drop back, go to his one read underneath, and then get rid of the ball. And whenever that was covered, he would look deep. And that's why we got the deep Adam Thielen touchdown before Thielen was injured in the second half. But right now, against this Cincinnati defense, that's what you can do because outside of Jacoby Brissett that they had no issue stopping in week 1, like every other defense so far in the league, the Bengals really weren't able to get pressure on either Patrick Mahomes or Jaden Daniels in their next 2 matchups. So everyone's asking if this offense is sustainable. At least in this game, I believe it is. I believe it's another very big outing for Andy Dalton with Deontay Johnson, who had a 37.5% target share in the second half whenever Adam Thielen got injured. So it's really Ross for this game. Start all your fantasy guys. Chuba Hubbard, Zach Moss, Andy Dalton, Deontay Johnson, Joe Burrow, and all his receivers. All of them are going to get them in this one.
Man, the way you said that, I got to look at what the over is. We didn't talk about that on the Even Money Betting podcast, but I already watched the the Raiders-Panthers because I'm doing that Browns-Raiders game, trying to see what the over-under is. It's 48.5. It's pretty high, but still feels like a pretty good chance at that one hitting the over. Good stuff, John. What about the Rams, the beat-up Rams, who still somehow scored 27 points against the Bears?
Hats off to Sean McVay. I really thought it was going to be the demise of that offense, and maybe it still will be, especially against this elite Bears unit who doesn't give it up to anyone at all. But to come through with that win, and I understand it really just came down to Ronnie Bell missing what should have been a deep catch in his back shoulder that Purdy delivered perfectly, but to still get the ball back and Stafford deliver an accurate throw in that last drive for the game-winning field goal, hats off to that team. Having said that, again, it's a very tough matchup, but at least we know where to go, because I was speculating, I believe I even mentioned it on the show, on Jordan Whittington, their explosive rookie from the preseason, perhaps coming through since he played the slot for Cooper Kupp in week 2. But that wasn't the case at all, because Sean McVay instead said, screw the 3-wide sets. We're down receivers, obviously. We're just going to lead the league in 2 tight end personnel. And that's what they did. It was Tutu Atwell and Demarcus Robinson on the outside, basically playing every snap with Davis Allen and Colby Parkinson instead. And it was Tutu Atwell in this game who got there with a team-high 21.7% target share. He's the player I suggest you pick up off waiver wires just because it seems like he's locked into 2 wide receiver sets for the foreseeable future. Kyren Williams also continues to get every single running back touch as a matchup-proof starter. So even though, just like the 49ers, this seems to be an impossible spot on paper, you start Kyren Williams because you know at least he's going to get 26 touches and no one else in the backfield is going to touch the ball. But for the Bears side, that's where this gets interesting, because finally we got a 300-yard performance from Caleb Williams. And it was a little bit of garbage time, a little bit of Matthew Stafford, Detroit-esque, padding your stats at the end of the game. But at least we saw that Caleb Williams can deliver fantasy production whenever the matchup is easier for him. And that's what this is. Because if it were not for the Commanders' defense, I think everyone would recognize just how poor this Rams defense is without both Raheem Morris and Aaron Donald this year. I expect a massive game from Caleb Williams. And if that is the case, we know where the ball is going to go. It's still DJ Moore, who I understand isn't delivering the box score, but still leads the team in targets through 3 games. But also Rome Odunze, who finally popped and even seemed to have a rapport with Caleb on a big 47-yard throw down the left sideline. The deep threat who, remember, at Washington last year, led the nation in contested catches. Rome Odunze is an immediate wide receiver 3 or flex option in your lineup this week because of this matchup. And then the final guy who we should be excited about is Cole Kmet. Because we saw in week 1, Cole Kmet was an afterthought with Keenan Allen soaking up all the targets. But the last 2 games for the Bears, Cole Kmet's target share jumped from 3.5% in week 1 to 18.5% the last 2 games. Those 3 guys for the Bears should be in every lineup for players this week.
Labatt Blue Light should be in your lineup in terms of what you're going to drink while you're watching the games and playing fantasy football with your friends. Always enjoy it responsibly. It is delicious beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Let's talk Vikings and Packers. How many people have been streaming Malik Willis the last couple of weeks, John? And what do we do about him this week?
If it's Malik Willis, it's still tough, even in Superflex leagues, just because for as much respect as I have for Matt LaFleur and getting through these last 2 games, I probably have more respect for Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores for the jobs they've done through 3 weeks. Not even CJ Stroud could get there against Brian Flores with everyone at full strength at his wide receiver position. So moving forward, the spots against the Vikings are just ones we worry about altogether. Having said that, Jordan Love is potentially going to make it back. And if that is the case, there are 2 players I want to put on everyone's radar. One, Jaden Reed, who had 6 targets in week 1, just 1 target fewer than Romeo Doubs, but more importantly, 2 touchdowns from the slot in his 1 game with Jordan Love this season. And 2, it's Doubs, because Doubs is on the waiver wire everywhere and did lead the team in targets in week 1 from Jordan Love. That's probably as far as I get outside of Josh Jacobs simply for the touches, because, again, this Brian Flores defense is no joke right now. On the other side of the ball is where it gets interesting, though, because Sam Darnold arguably a top 3 MVP candidate, oddly enough, through 3 weeks, has been amazing, and it's because of the position Kevin O'Connell continues to put him in, and maybe this is another good spot, because so far, all we've seen against the Packers secondary is Jalen Hurts having immense success through the air in week 1, 270 with 2 touchdowns. But since that time, the Packers have only faced inaccurate quarterbacks, developing quarterbacks, and Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. So we just don't know how tight, if anything, their secondary is. And I'm willing to push that in one quarterback leagues with Sam Darnold as a top 12 option, especially for getting Jordan Addison back this week. So Sam Darnold, it may not seem like it's a sneaky start. I think people may be a little bit scared off him, but he's a better start this week than Matthew Stafford, Trevor Lawrence, and a handful of other quarterbacks that people are going to roll out instead.
Jacksonville is in Houston to take on the Texans. It's bad for the Jags, John. It is bad.
It's horrendous. I don't know who to blame there. I feel like Doug Peterson isn't helping out either, but all we know right now is that Trevor Lawrence is a league low 48% completion rate right now, worse off than Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, you name it. Not only that, but he hasn't finished as a top 10 quarterback in fantasy in 7 consecutive games going back to last year. The entire offense is broken, and he's averaged less than 7.5 yards per attempt in 3 or 4 games against DeMeco Ryans' Texans defense, going back to a couple years ago as well. So it's a spot, honestly, where I'm worried about everyone. I mentioned Sam Darnold. Geno Smith is on the waiver wire as well. Justin Fields is out there. Right now, there are so many better options you can find in fantasy football than starting Trevor Lawrence. So when I suggest you even drop in one quarterback leagues for these better options until the Jaguars, if they ever, figure it out. The only wide receivers you can trust as well, although Christian Kirk did bounce back in a negative game script for basically 3 quarters against the Bills on Monday night, Brian Thomas is really still the only one that we're trusting here since he continues to play in 2 wide sets alongside Gabe Davis and over Christian Kirk. On the other side of the ball, I think there is a little bit of a signal because the more zone defense the Texans see, Stephon Diggs has been the one that's really been peppered shallow and over the middle to get rid of the ball. Tank Dell also didn't get there last week, although his target share is still respectable 17%. He's still getting downfield shots and getting carries, so he's someone I'm trying to buy low on. But the consistent start that probably won't shock anyone is Nico Collins here. Collins again getting there last week, but more importantly for this matchup, the Jaguars have led the league under Press Taylor in man coverage. And Nico Collins, so far, the 6th most target against man coverage for 4.4 yards per route run. Has absolutely destroyed, which even logically makes sense when you think about it on the field, because when you're in man coverage, obviously, you cannot cover Nico Collins. So it seems like a nuclear week for Collins in particular.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why the Jaguars are playing as much man coverage as they are, especially with Tyson Campbell out. You know, he's their best cover corner.
Darnell Savage was out last week as well. Remember, that's what they did on 70% of their snaps against the Dolphins too. And no man walks into Miami thinking you should play man coverage against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
And what's interesting is it worked for a while.
Yes.
Because they were taking away the underneath
2
stuff
quarters
with the robber, and then it worked until it didn't work, and Tyreek Hill and Waddle both had bombs, and that's why the Jags lost the game. Okay. Yeah. Let's get to the Steelers at the Colts. Really curious to get your breakdown of this one.
It's been tough slanting for Anthony Richardson, who is clearly still a developing quarterback with electric plays. We go back to week 1 and how highly we talked about some of his dots he threw, 50 yards downfield. But the egregious turnovers are still not only upsetting, but there. Richardson has been the QB 25 and QB 31 in fantasy the past 2 games. Literally unstartable, even in Superflex leagues. And this past week, everyone saw his egregious interception inside the 10-yard line, where, like a lot of young quarterbacks, he just held onto the ball and tried to extend the play far too long and make something happen rather than just moving on to the next down. And that's certainly concerning, especially against the Steelers defense that, alongside Joey Porter, will not only get after you, with TJ Watt, a man on a mission this year to be Defensive Player of the Year. But also Porter just consistently locking down at least one of the team's star wide receivers. This week, I believe that's going to be Michael Pittman. So I think really the only wide receiver we can start for the Colts right now, and I can't even say that with confidence, is Josh Downs, whose box score does not look good, but still popped for over 20% of the team's targets, was targeted at the 7th highest rate of any receiver in his first game from Anthony Richardson this year, since he was just activated with his high ankle sprain. And if we expect Richardson to be under duress, which we do, I think Downs is the safety valve there from the slot. So I like Josh Downs.
It did feel like, John, that they got the run game going a little bit more with Jonathan Taylor. And I guess I haven't noticed, but I guess I thought Richardson would run it more this year.
And they did trust him with a red zone carry last week to get them closer for a Jonathan Taylor 1-yard touchdown. But there's a lot of things going wrong for the Colts right now. Even last year, remember, Shane Steichen led the league in plays per game. He wanted to play as fast as possible. This year, they're running 4 fewer plays than any other offense in the league. I think regression is eventually going to come, but right now they're out of sync for a lot of different reasons. And maybe that's because they didn't have their starting quarterback for, 12, 13 games last year. So the Colts are still figuring it out. Jonathan Taylor is someone we don't talk about much on this show because to start him. Like you ignore 2 weeks ago whenever he didn't play a single snap in the fourth quarter because obviously they need Jonathan Taylor. It's someone they trust even though they threw in Trey Sermon for a goal line touchdown last week. So Jonathan Taylor, yes, hopefully that is an answer to alleviate the Steelers' pass rush. And on the other side of the ball, Justin Fields continues getting it done as a quarterback. And we've only seen the Steelers against one mobile quarterback so far, or the Colts, against one mobile quarterback so far this year. But even then, in week 1, we got Jalen Hurts there for over 40 yards and a touchdown. So perhaps between Justin Fields and George Pickens against this injured and beat up Colts secondary that doesn't seem to be stopping many people, those are the 2 spots to go here. The only other situation I would tell everyone to make sure they monitor as of Wednesday, Thursday, whenever you're listening to this, is Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Because Jaylen Warren is undergoing an MRI, and Najee Harris was saw in a sling in the locker room for an arm injury post-game week 3. If that's the case, Cordero Patterson is the next man up against this Colts front 7 that allowed career days to Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs this year.
So I want to make sure I got this right. Last year, the Colts, fastest offense in the league in terms of snaps and all that, they're running 4 less plays per game than any other team?
52 plays. The next closest is at 56, yes.
Wow.
I think a lot of that
fascinating.
I think a lot of that is regression. I think their opponents are also soaking up plays, but
some of it's the defense for
exactly.
sure.
And we're expecting them to come back to league average eventually, which is probably why Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, they're buy lows right now.
There's no I in football. It's a we thing. An experience best enjoyed together. Smirnoff knows that. That's why it's the perfect vodka for crafting delicious cocktails, easy to make and versatile for any and all fans over 21. They got a lot of good things going. It's the world's #1 vodka. It's an official vodka partner of the NFL. It's award-winning vodka, and they started in 1864. Grab a bottle of Smirnoff at your local retailer and head to Smirnoff.com to find recipes of delicious cocktails perfect for game day. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under the legal drinking age. All right, last but not least, Broncos and the Jets.
This one is not pretty, unfortunately, because the Broncos offense, although they did finally get back to action against a soft defense and the injured Bucs secondary, we're still very worried about this ferocious Jets defense just shutting them down. Cortland Sutton, team high 12 targets last week. The only wide receiver you're trusting right now, if any, among this Broncos wide receivers room. The backfield, though, is where everyone is concerned because there does seem to be a changing of the guard. Not only are they not getting as many targets as historically a Sean Payton offense has given his running backs, but Javonte Williams has really struggled this year. 24 carries resulting in 52 yards, fumbled last week, And then after that fumble, Tyler Beatty, their third-string running back, came off the bench and out-touched Javonte Williams 8-3. I suggest picking up Beatty in 12-team, 14-team leagues, just in case there is a true changing of the guard there. But even Jaleel McLaughlin got the goal line carry, so it could be a bit of a conundrum until we sort out which running back Sean Payton truly wants to lean on. On the other side of the ball, too, speaking of running back situations, Braylon Allen has emerged. It's still very frustrating, probably if you're a Cowboys fan, that the Cowboys leveraged a fourth-round pick for Trey Lance, a third-string quarterback, as opposed to drafting Braylon Allen or adding any other running back from day 3. But Allen now, the last 2 games, and this is with Breece Hall at full strength, Allen's been the RB6 and RB30. Not only like a startable RB2 for fantasy, but a clear weekly flex option as they run more pony formations in order to get both players on the field because they're 2 of their top 3 most talented offensive players. So in order to attack this Broncos defense, you have to be able to run the ball, since Patrick Surtain, who we'll talk about on the next episode, is just sending everyone to the shadow realm. If you go against Surtain this year, you come away doing absolutely nothing. And so I think it is going to be another day where we get double-digit touches for Braylon Allen as a flex option for everyone.
1 episode down, 1 to go. These are so fast, furious, awesome. I love it. I still got room for dessert.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.